Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you, everybody, for being here. We have our first panel today, and it's a very interesting panel because it speaks to something that is becoming somewhat of an epidemic, which is ad blocking. And of course, in a content industry which is fueled by ads, the fact that a large part of consumers are currently blocking ads, it's very worrisome, obviously. It's also very worrisome how fast it is growing. And so, today we have a panel joining us, Laura Montoya from Deseret, and she is actually teaching publishers how to address the branded content and the native advertising space, which is very critical as one of the key elements to combat this whole ad blocking debacle that is happening right now. And we have Vegard Johnsen. Laura is from Venezuela. She has a communications major, and she has been 15 years living in the United States.
Yes, 15 years, yeah.
So you're now American. You're not Venezuelan anymore. And Vegard Johnsen, he's coming from Norway. He is with Google. He joined Google after being acquired in a company that he was part of, and which was ensuring ad transparency. And of course, it's very fitting that he is with us today. He is in a team that does sustainable advertising. Is that the title? Yes, sustainable
correct.
Advertising, which is something we all want, sustainable advertising. So I'll turn it over to them. First, we're going to hear from Laura, and she's going to tell us how many things she's doing and how her view of the whole the content and branded content within this space. Laura.
Yeah, thank you. So I had the opportunity to have breakfast with these two fine gentlemen this morning. And of course, we were discussing ad blocking and the different solutions that native advertising brings to the table, and other solutions that will be discussed as well. And I think I made the mistake of saying
Brace.
of saying that I am a proud ad blocker, and it's a bit of a shock, but. I particularly do it because, one, when I'm teaching other publishers about native advertising, I like to also convey the value of native advertising in this way, by showing them how native advertising, or the majority of native advertising, because you brought a good point, some native advertising, depending on how you display it, could be blocked by an ad blocker as well. But so I like to convey the idea of native advertising being a solution to ad blockers, and then showing them firsthand how this is a solution. And the second thing, just as a consumer myself of media, I feel like ads ruin my user experience, and that's why I use ad blockers. And clearly, we know it's not the solution, as we discussed, and we will continue to discuss during this panel, to block ads. But however, I feel like it's gotten a little bit out of control, and the majority of us now users have the ability to control our own user experience through an ad blocker. And I believe I speak for nearly, we were speaking about it this morning, like more than 20% of the entire internet, right, in the globe.
There's actually an eMarketer study, I think, came out today that said that amongst millennials in the US, 2/3 now block ads on mobile and desktop combined. So you're definitely in good company. I think 20% is sort of a global average.
It's a global average, yeah. It's now more than 40+ million in the US, and then, 400 and something million people blocking on mobile. And as you know, that's where your audience is. It's on a mobile device. And if you think about it, think of yourself as a consumer before you even think of yourself as a perhaps owner of a media company or editor, and think, how do you consume media? And most of it happens on a mobile phone nowadays. Whether you are on the train, whether you are sitting on the couch, wherever you are, your mobile phone has become the device that you use to consume media. And a lot of ads are being blocked by people like you, not necessarily you, but
Well,
by
actually,
consumers.
let's ask that question. In this room, be honest, we have measures to measure the truthfulness here. Can I just have everyone raise their hand? Just everyone. Everyone? Yeah? Everyone? Okay. Now lower your hand if you don't use an ad blocker. Okay.
I'm not alone.
And then raise your hand if you've at least tried one once.
How about for testing purposes?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we have a few people who know.
Yeah. And so what we do, I'm part of a team at Deseret Digital Media where we provide a solution to ad blocking, and that is native advertising. And so, as you were saying earlier, I'm in charge of managing these relationships and really teaching advertisers how to properly engage in the native advertising world, whether that is through an article, video, meme, infographic, and so on. So not only do we teach publishers how to do it, we also help publishers fulfill the native advertising campaigns. And it's kind of a fun job.
But are native advertising also being blocked?
So native advertising, it's not necessarily blocked when you publish it like you do your editorial, which is how it's supposed to live. It's supposed to be mixed with your editorial content and live natively within your website. If you do other things like feeding it as if it were an ad and so on, then your ad blocker will register as an ad and will block it. And to me, that is not the way in which we teach native advertising. If you're doing it that way and that ad is being blocked, then you're not doing it perhaps the proper way.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about the state of native advertising? How do you see it evolving, developing?
Yeah, it's growing. In fact, earlier today, I had a client email me and say, Laura, can we get on a call here pretty soon because native advertising is in high demand and we need to make some adjustments internally and we'll love to get on a call. And yeah, I mean, it's growing. It's, and if you look at the different predictions, if you Google it, you will be able to see that, yeah, it's in high demand and it's growing. And, you just hear of different, like big players in native, like the New York Times, that are now, doing more advertising in the native space, and they are in the ad space. So yeah, it is growing, and the demand for it is as well.
We'll probably hear from Vegard on this, but so basically the problem is in display right now, the ad blocking problem, right? Can we focus on, is it something?
Yeah, I think that's where you see the biggest impact of it now. And I think that, though I always caution that we shouldn't think too much about what the problem is right now, because I think the fact that ad blocking rates globally are in the sort of 20% range, the reality is that for any individual publisher, they may see 50 or 60% ad blocking depending on their demographic. Or as we mentioned, if you're targeting millennials, then perhaps your ad blocking rates on average are 2/3. You may have websites that basically have no users that they can show ads to anymore. So I always caution to sort of, we need to think about where it's heading to. And I think the reality is that where it's heading to, we have probably 400 million ad blockers on mobile, primarily through browsers that enable ad blocking natively or in the browser itself. On desktop, perhaps a few hundred million, quarter of a billion, something like that. But it's growing 40% plus on desktop, 90% on mobile. And so I think we'll very soon get to a point where it is really unsustainable, because the ads are funding the open web as we know it. And I think whereas there are perhaps niches that are more resilient or perhaps less affected, I think that partly may be technical reasons. But I think it fundamentally comes back to the fact that users are telling us that they have an issue, right? They're sending a message. And frankly, I say this sometimes, and I don't know if my boss likes me to say this, but I'll say it anyway, that I don't have a problem with ad blocking. I have a problem with indiscriminate ad blocking. So ad blocking, if all it did was to remove those terrible experiences that, that for those of you who raised their hand who used ad blockers, or in your case, there are reasons. People typically can describe perhaps a single experience when they started using an ad blocker. And if ad blockers simply removed those terrible experiences, but left the good ones behind, they would actually be a force for change, a good force for change. Now, that's not how they work today. And I think that's why we have a problem, because they work in a binary fashion. And so you can have the best ad experience in the world on your site, yet you still lose all the ads to someone who has an ad blocker. And I think that's why sort of focusing on a niche where it doesn't apply so much, or a country where it's perhaps not such a big problem, is short-sighted, and we really need to look to how do we address the fundamental problem that 600 million people, perhaps soon to be 1 billion people, have said, enough, like take your ads and take them away.
I saw some numbers at a publisher which were about 12 to 13% of their users were actually blocking ads for a traditional publisher. What numbers are you seeing in the market? You mentioned, there's 22% overall. There's some, but in traditional publishers, in publishers that have valuable content like the ones that we have here, what is the case? How do you see it for both of you?
I've not researched that statistic specifically like that. Yeah,
so I speak to a lot of publishers, and the answer is it varies. I think we should distinguish between mobile and desktop. And I think that's sort of one thing to think about. I think if you look at why is ad blocking lower on a mobile, it is not because people love the experience that much more. It is because the friction to installing an ad blocker on mobile is greater. So I think if you want to see where mobile ad blocking rates are going to go to, then look to desktop, because I think that people have the same, if not more, issues. Limited screen real estate, more issues around data usage, etc. But so it depends very much on whether you have if you have primarily a mobile audience, then probably your ad blocking rates are lower. On desktop, what we typically see people report to us, so news publishers, for example, in the sort of 15 to 30%, when we speak to people who run some of these bigger companies that have multiple verticals, in gaming, 50 to 60%, depending on the demographic. And again, it depends very much on the country. So, in Western Europe, in some countries like Germany or some of the Scandinavian countries, the ad blocking rates are high. Perhaps, I think in Greece, it's more than a third now for the entire country. So it's significant and it's growing.
Definitely a problem. You mentioned the experience, and we talked about this morning. You actually described an experience. Please describe an experience. Why are you block ads, so you're obviously not in sync with that experience.
I said, we're in the information age, which is actually a good thing for publishers, right? Because you are in the information business. You are here to provide information to an audience, right? And so I'm seeking to read and consume my information. And I see, ads on the right rail and on the top and in between paragraphs in the story, and a pop ad at the bottom, and then another ad pops up, and I'm like, I am here to read about what it is that you have to say, and now I don't want to. Now I want to hit X on everything that it's popping and hit X at the very top and just exit your website altogether. And I think I'm not the only one that feels this way. I think sometimes we fall in the trap of not putting ourselves in the readers and audience shoes. And that's something that we need to constantly do, right? Because at the end of the day, that's your client. I mean, without an audience, really, you don't even have anything to sell when it comes to ads. And so providing a good experience to your audience, to your consumers, essentially also will bring you the clients, right? So maintaining your audience is really important. And that's something that we say with native advertising that it does. Like if you are creating good, valuable information that people can consume, people will continue to go back to your website. And in fact, 7 out of 10 people don't care to read an ad that is sponsored by Google or sponsored by Nike, because you're providing them good, valuable information at the end of the day, and you're not ruining their experience.
Do you see a world where websites wouldn't have banners?
Good question.
I don't, so I think I can't predict the future, and it's not part of my job description, but I don't think so anytime soon. And I think fundamentally, I mean, it's an interesting question, this about publishers, what they do to retain the audience, because I think there are sort of two very distinct problems here. One is all the choices you make, which includes your ad experience, but also includes your site experience. That determines whether people come back to your site, how engaged they are, how long they stay, etc. And that's clearly very important. I think, unfortunately, I don't think it impacts ad blocking very much at all, because there are extremely few websites that, in their own right, can cause ad blocking at scale, because there are just very few websites that just reach the entire sort of web population. I mean, we can think of a few that are big, but the problem you have is that you can have the best possible ad experience, and yet your ad blocking rates will be substantial, and they will be in line with whatever the demographic is that you target. And so if you take Wikipedia as an example, I think we can all agree the ad experience on Wikipedia is pretty decent, in that there are no ads. But if you measure ad blocking rates on Wikipedia, I can tell you it'll be whatever it is for the demographic that goes to Wikipedia. Why? Because ad blockers are sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater style. And that means that, let's just say you have a decent ad experience, and I think there is some correlation between very immersive units, ad units, rich ones, maybe ones that expand, maybe ones that have sound, and advertisers say, I want a full page takeover, and they describe something, but they'll pay for it. And you start saying no to that. You say, look, I only want simple text ads on my site. And I think as a result, you'd probably make less money, but I don't think you'd change your ad blocking rates at all. And that's the fundamental issue here, and why we believe that the way to solve this is not only through making your site have a good ad experience, but in fact the entire industry needs to take action and collectively improve the ad experience across the internet. As I said, you should all think about having the best possible experience on your own site. That is very important for keeping your specific readership and audience engaged and coming back, but it doesn't really solve the ad blocking problem. And that's why it was actually a month ago that we were part of a coalition that was announced at Demexco, the ad tech conference in Cologne, that we're part of a coalition that is focused precisely on that, on getting together, pulling together the data, and creating a standard, which is, in our view, the starting point. What is the standard for advertising that consumers are okay with? Because I think there are lots of theories and lots of people today who will go and say, I think ads should be smaller than 200 kilobytes, or they should have a latency less than, or insert anything that may sound very good as a soundbite. But unless the thing that you're talking about is precisely what you had that caused you to install an ad blocker, which by the description of the experience, that wasn't it. It was an interruption. It was something that got in between you and the content. Yeah. So we've got to understand what is the thing that is essentially driving consumers mad enough to install the ad blocker and opt out, and then we've got to figure out how to address that. And it's not enough to do it as an individual site.
To maybe feed on that, maybe we have a hands up on who has today data on the ad blockers that are going to their sites. Raise your hands. Okay, there's an issue.
Yes.
And we keep on talking about this experience. Can we expand on what does a good experience mean?
What does?
Yeah, what is a good experience? What is a good customer experience with ads? I mean, we need the ads, obviously, but that's where we live from. So.
And I want to put something controversial out there, which is I don't think we should think so much about what a good experience is. Because what is a good experience today may not be what's good tomorrow. And I think that as soon as you start trying to define here's what you should do, you limit innovation and change. And I'm a big believer in allowing, this has been it's an incredibly vibrant industry that's had a lot of innovation, and I'm a strong believer in making sure that continues. I think one danger is if you start saying these things are okay, then you create a box, and then now you can only operate within this box. Whereas if you start saying, look, the reality is she didn't install an ad blocker because she found something, not that great. She found something terrible, like enough to sort of go like, pull hair out if you have it, and take some action. And so I think we need to actually focus on what's the terrible experience that we're trying to avoid, and actually leave people open to experiment with new things, and just make sure that whatever we do, we are staying away from the things that are really alienating consumers.
Stuff like ads following you around, right? You make a purchase, or you research something, and then you're being stalked by some
by an algorithm. Really, yeah, you're being stalked by an algorithm. But yeah, as I said, earlier, like think as a consumer, think as a reader, right? Think when you actually are visiting a site that it's not perhaps the one that you may own or manage. How is your experience on that site? Did you like it? And what are the things that you can implement on your organization? We talked about native advertising, or having ads be more or less contained so that you're not ruining your audience's experience when they visit your website. But then you brought up a really good point, which is like we have a tendency to get in this box, right? And so providing like the one solution will mean that now we're going to be in this box, which is where we have been for the past couple of years, is in the box of banner ads and right rail ads, and the majority of the industry does not seem to try and get out of that box. And native advertising being one of those solutions, is like because it's not contained within the box, people have a hard time even exploring it.
But
and those that do, that actually do and do it well are seeing really good results. So it's like, what are the things that you can implement in your repertoire of your ways to make money in your industry? Like, think about that. Think a little bit outside the box, yeah.
But native is not void of controversy, obviously.
Absolutely.
You're now putting editorial staff in order to serve the brands and to create stories that are tied to the brands. How does that affect consumer confidence in terms of the trust, not the trust between the brand, the editorial brand, and the consumers, right?
Yeah, that's actually the most terrible way to do native. And it's very controversial. It's an issue of ethics, because you cannot have the same writer or journalist write about how fantastic this new hybrid car is, and then send them out on an assignment the next day and report how that hybrid just lit on fire in the corner, right, in this street or whatever. So there is a conflict, of course. And as we also know, the public and audiences also have sometimes a tendency to follow a particular writer, right? They're enamored with the things that this writer writes. So if they see this, like, wait a second, of course there's a conflict of ethics. So we recommend that does not happen at all. Your editorial team needs to do what they do best, manage editorial stories. And there should be a separate team that manages the writing and the execution of native advertising. The two need to marry and come together, because native advertising as the title says, needs to live within the editorial content. So there needs to be some communication back and forth between these two teams, but they should be absolutely separate. That's how we manage it at Deseret Digital Media, and that's also how we recommend to our clients that they manage it as well.
Do you see a major shift of ad dollars into the native?
As in, like, you...
Well, from brands, we know search is like the big one. Then there's display, and then others are coming in like native.
Yes.
But how much do you think brands are willing to use native versus more traditional formats like any IAB or search?
I honestly, so if you were to sit down with a brand and ask them, what does your marketing campaign look like? Native, it's a part of the marketing campaign, but it's not the whole marketing campaign. So, events is one thing. If you were to sit down with Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, it's like, okay, we do events. That is part of marketing. That's part of advertising. The other thing is maybe we engage in ads. The other thing, part of it, it's native advertising. And then, also publishing on their websites and so on. And so marketing is just a segment of that. Native advertising is just a segment of that marketing.
So we still need to deal with display being blocked, right? There's no way around it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of headlines, and there's a lot of, first of all, it's a lot of finger pointing. Whoever I speak with, it's someone else's fault that ad blocking is happening. So if I speak to publishers, they very often talk about advertisers and their demands. If you speak to advertisers, they talk about how publishers implement terrible sites with too many ads, and everyone's got some theory about who it is. And we've actually done quite a lot of surveys and spoken to people who installed ad blockers and asked them a very simple question, which is, why did you install an ad blocker? So I just want to, this is not maths class, but if you think about the fact that maybe 20 to 25% of the internet have an ad blocker, then on average, if you ask someone, does this annoy you? Would this cause you to install an ad blocker? The answer should be, I don't know, because they haven't got to the point where they installed an ad blocker, right? So only the 20 to 25% who installed it can answer the question, why did you install it? So we spoke to those people, and what you find is that there are a number of very sexy sort of headline-grabbing things, like privacy, which is important, and malware protection, which is important, but they don't come out top. The thing that comes out top by a long distance are interruptions. They're doing whatever they're doing, and then something, the ad, gets in the way of that. And I think we often sort of get stuck in talking about whatever the potential approach is, and we can criticize it because it doesn't solve this thing or it doesn't solve that thing. But in my belief, it's sort of an 80-20. Let's focus on the thing that has the biggest impact, which is this interruptions-based thing. I also think that it's important to understand that there is no one archetypal ad blocker. There are in fact multiple. And so in our research, we've found that there are sort of 4 groups. There are people who are dogmatic and are really opposed to ads, and I think the way you engage with that type of audience is different, so that they really don't want ads, and you can't really convince them to that ads have a role. You have people who they do it out of convenience. They're like, I don't really need to discuss this. I have no strong sort of moral feelings about it, but I do it because it does what I need. You actually have a significant group of people who don't know they have an ad blocker. So these are people someone else installed it for them, or it's a corporate ad blocker. And then you have people who do it reluctantly. So they do it for some reason. I think one challenge is to come up with solutions for these individual groups. And so at a very high level, the way we think about the approach. So first of all, I said, look, if you think about an ad blocker, and I think there's a great example in the ad blocker that was on iOS that was called Peace, I think it was called. It was pulled off out of the App Store. This is on iOS. It was pulled out of the App Store after only a few weeks. It was the top, I believe it was the top-ranked ad blocker at the time. And the developer said that it was just an all-or-nothing approach. he didn't have the ability to remove ad experiences, only the ad experiences on sites that were terrible, but leave good ad experiences. So he said, look, I don't think this is the route we should go. And so that is one aspect, is being able to take action only on these, on the terrible experience. And I think, so if you look at the various, for example, the dogmatic ad blockers, they fundamentally don't want ads. And so I think saying to them, look, we can make the ad experience better, doesn't really change the value equation for them. Whereas someone who's doing it because the ad experiences are terrible, in your case, maybe you could be convinced. And I think the other very important aspect when you look at the groups and the various reasons people ad block is some people, they'd rather pay. So they're saying, I don't want the clutter, I don't want the interruptions. I'd like to pay for my content. But the reality of the internet today is, how many subscriptions would you need? How many sites do you go to per year? 400, 500? I mean, in this industry, we probably go to a lot. So that's not really feasible. You can't subscribe to 500 sites. And people, again, tell us that really the only way that they would consider a payment option would be if it was convenient and they could sort of pay once and get access to many things. So we sort of believe there are three, at a top level, three things that need to happen. One, you need to be able to define what are the terrible ad experiences based on data, based on speaking with consumers. And you need to then give users choice. That has an educational value, but also for those who want it. And then the third aspect is that the industry needs to make this happen. No individual entity, organization, however large, is going to fix this if they're the only one doing it.
Interesting. So that speaks to the title of this panel, which is ad blocking as an opportunity, right?
Correct.
How would you see that? Where do you see those opportunities? You just mentioned some in terms of policy and how to get the industry going in one direction. Where do you see the opportunity?
Well, I can speak for native advertising just because that's, the area and the realm in which I live. And so the opportunity that lies there with native advertising that I believe I told a little bit to you guys earlier when we were having breakfast is that native advertising, if you do it really well, can actually yield more page views than your actual editorial content, which is what our website, ksl.com, experiences. They get about 23% more page views on native advertising than they do on their editorial content. And that is an opportunity that we are exploring, right? Not only are we accomplishing what we all want to accomplish as a publisher, which is somebody to pay for the content because someone needs to pay for the content. So we already got that solved by getting a sponsor for the content. Two, we're making sure that we're providing such a good quality of content, whether that's an article, a video, a meme, or an infographic, that our readers not only love the experience, not only love the content, they like it, they share it. And so not only are we catering to our audience and giving them and providing them good content, we are growing our audience as well. And so that's the opportunity with native advertising. When you do native advertising in a really good way, not only are you getting the advertising dollars that you wish to have and that you're trying to get from ads that are now being blocked, but you're also providing really good quality content to your audience, and then on top of that, you're growing your audience. And it's content that also does really well on social media if you know how to do it. By the way, it also plays really good on mobile. So it's a solution for mobile, right? On a mobile screen, if you take a look at it right now, which the majority of you are already engaged in looking at your mobile screen, you can see that where is the right rail side of ads? It's non-existent. So what are you going to do? Native advertising is a solution for that, we see. You consume the content, you give, we say, instead of giving the byline to the person that wrote the content, give the byline to your advertiser. That in and of itself, it's a link. Create curiosity with this article. 5 things that the active couple needs. One of them, it's a ring that can stretch because when you go on a hike, your fingers swell, and you create curiosity in the reader, so much so that they go, oh my goodness, what is this? They click on a link that it's already in there. And so that's why the majority of them don't even care that they're reading an article that it's sponsored, because it's like, listen, I clicked on it knowing that you were going to talk to me about the 5 different things that I need as an active couple. So I'm already interested in that subject. You provided me good information, and then you are linking in there in a very organic way, who is the person that makes the rings? I want to click on it. And they feel like they are in charge of that experience, right? It's not a pop ad that said, plastic rings for the active couple. Like, no, I don't want to see that. I want to consume the content and organically and naturally move toward continuing with my research. And that's what native advertising provides.
Okay, we just gone through it, that it's part of the solution, right?
It's part of the solution.
You
yes.
mentioned something that I would like to maybe once you expand is this is an opportunity to start talking to your audience, right? I've seen several examples. Gruner and Jar had a funny campaign where they, put the people with the black line on their face, Okay, others. There was a big ad on a bus that said "block this," right? In London, there are also those guys who are getting more aggressive and actually blocking the entrance to the sites to ad blockers. How do you see that reaction from publishers, from one spectrum to the other, and what would you recommend?
So, well, we're always a big fan of experimenting and learning, and so I think as sort of a way to gather data, I think it's one avenue. Fundamentally, though, the back and forth with an ad blocker, actually taking a step back, I always talk about ad blockers. As I said right at the start, I don't have a problem with ad blocking. I have a problem with indiscriminate ad blocking. Ad blocking is a symptom of an underlying problem. So the whole kind of picking a fight with the ad blocker is kind of like treating a disease by going after the symptom. And we know that isn't effective. You need to deal with the underlying cause. And so I sort of go, I'm a bit agnostic. I understand that it's difficult. If you're a publisher and your print sales are flagging and suddenly 20, 30, 40% of your online revenue disappears, then you have an issue, clearly. But so it might be tempting in the short term to go that route, but I think it doesn't really address the underlying issue. And so that's kind of where our focus is the underlying cause of the problem. But as I said, the other, of course, challenge is that anyone in isolation isn't going to solve this. And so I think what we've seen that works is when you engage the audience and you have a frank discussion. I think some of the things we've seen that works is, for example, some sites will they'll say, look, we noticed you have an ad blocker. It's fine. Here's your first free article of the week or of the month or whatever. And then as you go, you might get to the 5th one, and then you might be asked to do something. And I think when people do it, as you say, when you focus on the consumer and you put yourself in their shoes and you try to figure out, well, people don't like being told what to do. So if you say, switch off your ad blocker, otherwise you're not getting my content, what we see is that and people have written extensively about this, there are significant percentages of people that just leave your site and don't come back. So I do think that there's a trade-off, and it's a difficult one to balance. I think there is no right answer, though long term, I am very confident that the efforts that are ongoing will reduce ad blocking. And there are really 2 problems. One, how do you prevent the 70, 75, 80% of the population who don't have an ad blocker from installing it in the first place? Mm-hmm. Okay, that is a very big chunk. So if we can do that, then we've made a very big win. We clearly then need to have a solution for the 20 to 25% who have an ad blocker. But I think it's really important to understand something needs to change. That is the message from the consumer. So if you basically try to stick back the same terrible ad experience that got the person to block ads in the first place, then they will become extremely angry. And so I think there needs to be, the improvement needs to be there, and we need to understand that what we're putting back is in fact better than what was there before.
So what would you think, let's say, to improve the ad experience, right? You mentioned the number of ads on the page. So one way to improve the ad experience is to limit the number of ads you put on a single page, right? Now that goes contrary to the need to generate revenues, right? And you could go back to the brands and say, well, because we're not putting so many ads, you're going to pay more for that ad. I think that the end, we already know probably what the answer is going to be. So that's one. The other is to turn to other formats, right? The New York Times recently said that they're going to stop using IAB formats and actually only use their own native and special, but they're the New York Times. Not everybody is the New York Times, right? So what other things can be done to improve the ad experience?
So we've done a lot of research, and we will be, we obviously working with the coalition, and we're part of the coalition and providing that data. I just want to point out that this is a really hard problem to work out. So we can all talk about extremes, right? The pop-up is really annoying, the text ad is not. But what's in the middle? I want to give you an example. So one of the things we found in our research was that if you look at a mobile, and you might think, so just straw poll actually, imagine you have a mobile phone, okay, here's your screen, and you have an ad. I'm going to give you two ad experiences. It's just, you've got your content at the bottom. There's an ad that is about this wide, and it's one of these sticky ads that sits at the bottom. You just, as you scroll, it's just permanently there at the bottom of your screen. And then you have another ad that is the full width of the screen, okay? That's number one and number two. So raise your hand if you think number one, the shorter one, is the more favorable ad. Okay? So raise your hand if you think the full width one is the preferable one. Okay, so we have maybe 50-50, right? So it turns out that I was thoroughly convinced that surely the smaller the ad, the better. But turns out that's not the case. People get reminded that there's an ad because you get content scrolling on the side of the ad. So by making it full width, so essentially by making the ad bigger, people like it more, by a lot. Okay? So this is an example of the fact that this, might sound like you can answer this question intuitively, but you can't. And that's why we're very focused on this being data-driven, so that you understand not sort of ballpark, or I think this is terrible, but really, you put people in front of an experience where they're engaging with content, they're experiencing it, and you ask about the experience, and that will then drive an understanding of where does it start getting terrible. And I think once you do that, then you need to start working. And I think to your question, not everyone's the New York Times. I think the other problem is that, as we discussed, you changing anything in isolation doesn't work. So when you talk about ad density, for example, it's true. If you reduce the ads on your website, but no one else does, then you have a problem.
Right.
If you reduce the ads on your website and literally the entire industry does, then the availability of ads goes down and there are fewer ads to buy. So now I'm not saying it's perfect and no, there might not be a dip, but I think we've got to recognize we're at a crossroads here. We do something, we fix the issue, and then this industry can continue to be healthy, or we sort of continue on the path that we're very well on, and we're heading for billions of ad block users where there's no revenue. So I know which one of those I would like to be part of, and I think that's why it needs industry.
So this is the global warming of the advertising industry.
Right.
Seriously, yeah. And creating, like having all your eggs in one basket, it's, as we know, it's not the best strategy for absolutely anything, And so diversifying in the way in which you create revenue it's also a good thing to do, while this ad blocking thing gets figured out and whether, we have the ability to improve ads or not and how that's going to look like diversify the ways in which you are creating revenue and the ways in which you are advertising.
Well,
there are other options out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would like to, let you guys make some questions and join in the conversation. Would you like, anybody has a question regarding their business and how it is affecting them, or is it affecting anybody? Yeah, Rosenthal?
Well, one thing that I want to say, I'm Rosenthal Alves from the Knight Center at the University of Texas. One thing that I want to say is that I think there is a conspiracy in the world to make me hate advertising. I mean, it's so badly done. It's so aggressive. And it's becoming worse and worse. Even with all the ad blocking growth, you would think that they would improve, and the ads are intrusive, are aggressive. My conspiracy theory is good. But anyway, my question is about ads that are coming that come with virus, with malware, and with malicious intentions. And this is happening a lot. One of the reasons people are using ad blocks is to stop that epidemic. So do you know about that?
Yes. So I was actually not working on ad transparency previously. I was working on ad fraud, or preventing it, rather. So I'm very familiar with malware and malware introduced through ads. So, from Google's perspective, it is something that we take very seriously, and as you probably know, Chrome will in fact prevent you from, or put up an interstitial if you go to a website that has been found to either have malware itself or carry ads that point to sites that have malware. And unfortunately, a significant number of people click through that interstitial, but that's a different story. So I think that's an issue. As I mentioned earlier, malware is one of those things that people love to talk about, and it makes for great headlines. And in fact, some people feel guilty about the ad blocker. So if you say, well, I was protecting my privacy and malware and all the terrible things out there, the reality is that it's something like 2 to 3 times more common to install an ad blocker because you were annoyed by some interruption than because of malware. But malware is a real concern, and I think that is, again, one of those things that is part of the solution. If we don't address that, there will certainly be a number of people who will install ad blockers because of that. That being said, not that many people actually know about malware, or know about the fact that you can get it through ads, nor how to install an ad blocker. So I do think it's not the biggest cause, but it's certainly something we take very seriously and invest extensively in addressing.
Certainly not an issue with native, right?
Not at all.
What
I don't need to say anything else.
What percentage of your entire ad inventory today or inventory sales is native versus display?
So I don't sell native. I only am there to teach how to do native and make sure that the campaigns get fulfilled. I'm sure that each one of our properties, whether that's KSL.com or the Desert News or the Family Share Network, they may have their own numbers, but that I'm not aware of. Yeah, those specific numbers. Yeah.
You teach both advertisers and publishers, right?
Well, not directly the advertiser. I don't ever have contact with the advertiser per se, but I have the publishers come to me about how to deal with the advertisers, if there are any questions and so on. But initially, we also teach them from the very beginning how to understand native advertising, and then how to properly convey the value to a client and so on, how to close the deal, and everything that has to do with the conversation.
Matt?
Yeah. Matthew Sanders, Deseret Digital Media. Where does video factor in the world of ad blocking and branded content? How does it fit as a priority?
Well, I can speak to on the ad blocking side of things. I mean, I think it's definitely something people are passionate about. It's interesting that if you compare it with TV, you could think that sites that are primarily video, so then you might expect that people think of it as TV, where I've recently moved to America, and there's a lot of ads on TV. But they don't. They're actually much less accepting of ads on video. And I think that needs to be part of the solution. So from our perspective, we believe that whatever it is that consumers are communicating that really annoys them and really gets to them, and that are part of leading to ad blocking, is something that this coalition needs to figure out what the standards, and they certainly need to encompass online video as well as display advertising and other types of advertising.
When it comes to native, video, it's a fantastic play. First of all, if you're reading anything about statistics and so on, I mean, the demand on video has gone from here to like here, right? It's just gone like this. And just think about it yourself. I mean, people want to be able to consume a video and get quick information as well, instead of having to scroll and so on. And so doing native advertising through video, it's a fantastic solution, and more advertisers want to engage in doing video as well when it comes to native advertising, because that's what people want to consume. They want to consume video. It plays really well on a mobile phone, which is where the majority of your audience is. And even you can extend that to talk about algorithms. Right now, Facebook's algorithm is preferring natively uploaded video over even an article. And so if you think about it too, what I was saying earlier, like, not only are you advertising an idea or something that has to do with whatever your advertiser wants to convey and establish themselves as a leader in whether it's their local community or the global community. So you're accomplishing that goal with the advertiser or for the advertiser, but you're also, increasing page views, and you're also being favorited by Facebook's algorithm because you're uploading video. And so native is video is a fantastic way to do native.
But I think it's just worth pointing out some of the complexity here. The context matters a lot. So when people are on a site where they expect video, they have certain expectations, but they probably wouldn't be surprised by the video playing with sound. What we see is that one of the things that annoys people very much are auto-playing video ads with sound in places that people don't expect them. So they're sitting in the office, browsing something, and that is so. But the same ad could elicit very different responses in different contexts. So I think that is one of the challenges, of course, in trying to deal with this, is that there's no sort of simple heuristic like blue ads are really annoying, therefore we should just ban them and we're done with it. It's actually a pretty complicated scenario that we're dealing with.
You mentioned context, and the way I look at context is through data, right? And through having better data about our users and being able to customize the experience and to deliver the ads that actually that user wants. I mean, for me, ads are good information that consumers need in order to make decisions about things that they need to buy at a certain point in time. They're bad when, you already bought something and they keep hammering you, buy this, buy this. Oh, I already bought it. Why are you sending me more ads, right? So that's lack of data, right? Is that, do you think, also part of that user experience that should be, confronted by the media companies?
So I think people, it's a funny one, because the more targeted the ads are, the more people start talking about the fact that it may be creepy. And then when they're not targeted, people say that they're not targeted, so now that's annoying. So I think that's a hard balance. There is a piece of education, I think, where people don't necessarily understand where the data is coming from. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done around transparency, making sure that, and coming back to this point of user choice, right? For some people, the reality is there's probably both. So for some people, and in fact we have introduced and we keep on providing more controls, and I know that was one of the things Facebook introduced along with their recent sort of interactions with ad blockers is that they introduced additional controls. Again, something that we've also been doing, introducing controls for people to say, I don't want contextually targeted ads, or I do want them. I don't want ads for these types of products, etc. So I think that this is one that really comes down to enabling people to have it the way that
Customize
they're
their
comfortable with, whether that's more or less targeting.
Okay, so any more questions? Yes? Rosenthal, and then
One thing that was not mentioned, but I think it's very important also, is the speed. You know, the download with all these ads that come from, with everything. I saw a slide that one typical page has connections to more than 300 computers around the world. So with all these ads come a lot of things that make the download or slow down the download. Do you think this is one of the factors of the irritation against ads?
So it's a really interesting one. We thought it would be a very big factor, but actually it isn't a particularly big driver in ad blocking. Now, I think that is actually for the reason that other than people in this room who are very savvy about advertising, they don't necessarily, are not able to associate the fact that the page is slow if it was caused by the ad or if it's caused by the page itself. Now, I think there are certainly pages that are slow inherently. There are pages that are slow because of ads. Both cases happen. I mean, so that definitely impacts return visits, and it's been shown very clearly that if your page takes more than a certain percentage time to load, the rate of people bouncing out goes up dramatically. We've obviously invested heavily in this with AMP, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and you know, that's seeing tremendous success. Precisely, one of the big pluses for that is around the speed, hence the name, accelerated. So I think it's a very important factor in making it a pleasant experience. I don't think it's a big driver for ad blocking currently. That potentially will change, but it's certainly something that we care deeply about and invest in.
Hi, my name is Thiago. I'm from the Brazilian Association for Investigative Journalism. So 2 questions. One regarding to the native ad as a way to deal with the problem. What if, assuming that you will have to tell the consumer that this is a native ad, what to do if the ad blockers start to block the native ads as well? And the second question, regarding to the music industry, one of the ways that made people stop downloading illegal MP3s was related to friction, because you would download a corrupt file or with virus and everything. I would like to hear from you the role of creating friction as a way of getting out of this. You said that you don't believe in these switches, so in the message, oh, you have to switch your ad blocker right now. How do you think about this in this context?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so first question, you know, if native advertising starts to be blocked, then there's something to be done. Then, you know, I have no idea what that will look like. I have no idea what kind of solution there would have to be in order to stop ad blocking now for native advertising. What I do know is that the majority of consumers, in fact, 7 out of 10 people, do not mind a native advertising ad because it does not ruin their experience, because it's usually content that it's one they want to consume. They clicked on it because they wanted to. It doesn't ruin their user experience and so on. And so that's a really good statistic, right? The majority of people don't mind reading a native advertising article. So I see it kind of hard for us to get there, and nearly, well, clearly not impossible, right? Not everything, like that's not impossible. We could certainly get there. I don't see us getting there anytime soon. So I hope that answers your question, even though it's not necessarily a direct answer to your question.
Yeah, so regarding the second question, so thank you for that. That's a good question. Firstly, a small correction. I didn't actually say that I don't believe in it. I said you have to be very careful with that, because in isolation, it doesn't achieve anything. But as part of a suite of responses, then I think it has its place. As I mentioned, I think you have to think of the two different groups: the people who have already installed an ad blocker and the people who have not. So for the people who have not, the friction piece, we've got to prevent them and improve the ad experience such that they don't feel the need to install it in the first place. But for the people who do have one, once the ad experience is better and they can reasonably expect that the experience they get if they were to whitelist or disable the ad blocker would be better, then I think that friction will be part of the solution, partly simply because you have to engage in a conversation and say, look, it costs money. I'm sure you can appreciate it costs money to send journalists to go report on things, and so we've got to pay for that somehow. Now, I don't actually agree that the thing that changed the music industry so much was friction. I think that was a very small, niche thing. I think what changed it was the fact, to a large extent, and this is not my thinking, but Apple coming out with iTunes and making it relatively affordable to buy music legitimately, I think took many people who otherwise felt that it was too expensive and too inconvenient. They started buying it because they could, and they felt that the value exchange was reasonable. And I think that is precisely what we need to do with advertising. Is, to your point, I think look, let's just be clear, it needs to get better. That is step one. And we need to make it such that people have more control, and if people want to pay, we need to make that more reasonable. So I think there are parallels to draw with that industry, but not so much around the friction, but around making it, delivering it in a way that people are comfortable with.
Any more questions from the audience? Well, I think we need to almost wrap it up. I would like to make maybe a brief summary of what we've kind of touched on. And first, obviously, is collect data about what's happening with your ad blockers today. And we just saw that almost nobody is. So that needs to start happening. Maybe the consortium can help in some way. I don't know in which
Well, the IB certainly has published some open source scripts in order to understand it. There's also a number of companies that provide analytics services, and I think some of them may even be free as well.
Okay. The second is to improve the experience altogether, both in ad density and in the number of interruptions that you actually are putting in front of the consumer. And I heard a third, which is actually diversify your formats. Don't depend on the display. Really go into native and try to explore better ways of telling and bringing the stories brands want to tell to consumers, right? So anything else that I left out that you think that they should be thinking of?
Native advertising it's, at least for us at digital media, it's a multi-million-dollar business. And that's what sometimes, publishers perhaps overview, that it's a really good source of revenue. And, as you said, diversifying and exploring that as a solution, and also, continuing to see how we can improve the ad experience. It's imperative for, the media to survive.
I think I forgot one point, which is talk to your users, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's, from our perspective, look, change will need to happen. It's clear, it's a very clear message out there that people are dissatisfied with the experience that they're getting. I'm very positive about the things, so we touched upon this earlier, that this is an opportunity for good things. And I see it as sort of a bit of a cleansing of, we've gone through a sort of a period of a whirlwind of innovation, and I think many great things, but I think that we've got to a point where there are challenges, and all is not good. But at the same time, the coalition that is formed now, if you look at the participants, it's a really strong start, and I think it'll grow over the coming period. And I'm personally very positive about.
You mentioned the coalition several times. Does it have a name?
Betterads.org
Okay.
has the press release and the participants and everything. And certainly, it's something to consider also to get involved in. And there's actually a form on the website where you can express interest to participate as well. So I certainly encourage people to look into that.
By the way, one last thing is there's a way to do both native advertising and display ads combined. And we've run out of time, and if you want to grab me in the hall, I can, show you guys if you have questions about that, but that may be another option as well to explore.
Well, thank you both very much. I think we deserve a hand of applause for our panelists. It's been very interesting, and hopefully we'll have less ad blockers soon enough.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias